Now we're going to be talking about percentage of change, and the best way to talk about that is through a visual of height, okay? So let's say this is me and this is my niece or something like that. Let's say over the course of a year, I grew from 5 foot tall to 6 foot tall. So I grew by a foot, right? Which is a big deal. But let's say my little niece, she grew from 1 foot tall to 2 foot tall over the course of a year. Now you may say, well, I'm growing. Me and her are both growing the same amount. We're both growing by a foot. But who has the biggest change? Well, she does, obviously, because she doubled in height. That's what percentage of change is, right? It's basically saying, well, where did I start at? Where did I go? And like, what's the difference between those two? So she has the biggest percentage of change, really. But how much is that percentage of change? Let's find out. So let's talk about it. So I started off 5 foot tall, and then I got 6 foot tall over the course of a year. Well, that's an increase in growth. Okay, well, how much of an increase? Well, 1 foot. I'm going to show you the math just to make sure I prove my point. So to find out, you just take away the final, take away the initial, which is 1. So it's a 1 foot growth, right? Well, how much? Again, that's what we already discussed. How do I determine the percentage? Well, a percentage is just a ratio of the change over the initial amount. So what I do is I take this number, this 1 foot, and I divide it, which is, remember, 1 foot is the change, right? And I divide it by the starting amount. Well, how much did I start off with? I started off as 5 foot tall. So I just divide those two. You can use a calculator, you can use your knowledge of fractions, and I know that's going to be 0.20. Now you may say, well, that's a decimal, not a percent. Well, how do I convert from a decimal to a percent? You just move the decimal 2 places over. So this is a 20%. Now, is this a growth or like an increase or a decrease? Well, this is an increase, right? So this is a 20% increase in height, very technically, right? So I grew by 20%. Now, how much did she grow? Well, is she going to grow more or less? We grew the same amount. Well, let's prove the point, okay? Let's see how much she's going to grow compared to me. So again, she starts off as 1 foot tall, and then she grows to 2 feet. Again, I'm going to do the same math. I'm going to do the final amount, which is 2 feet minus 1, which again, we already established. We both have the same height change, right? We both went up by a foot. But what's the percentage of change going to be? Well, let's find out. So again, the change is 1 foot versus the initial height, which hers was 1. This is going to be where it gets a little interesting. So 1 divided by 1, that's 1. Now you may say, well, how do I write that as a decimal? 1 is the same thing as like 1.00, right? So if I move this decimal 2 places over, that's going to be a 100% increase. So who had the higher growth rate? Well, again, we both grew the same amount, but she had the higher increase or percentage of change, right? Because she grew essentially another person, an entire foot, an entire herself, right?